Hey, welcome back everyone. Our old planer is out again. I don't know if it was on a video or not. The handle that's on the top to adjust the height of this up and down, the handle broke, and the shaft that it fits on actually sits down inside the top cover that was on here. So we had to remove the top cover, and that of course held the sides on, so now the sides are off, and we've got vice grips clamped on this rod so we can adjust the height of the cutting head up and down. So the old planer is still working, but it's getting a little rougher. So today we're going to make some trellises for tomato plants in the garden. Last year I just used some really cheap scrap wood to try it, and it seemed to work, except that the wood wasn't heavy enough, and with the weight of the tomato plants it warped the wood, bent it, it actually broke one piece. So we've got those leftover 2x4s from the skids we used on the last project that we were taking the skids apart to go around the shed to stop the rabbits. So I'm going to plane these 2x4s down. They're just outside for the trellis in the garden, so I'm not going to get fancy with the thickness of them and making sure they're all uniform. I just want to make them a little bit smoother, so if you brush up against them you're not getting full of slivers. So I'm going to plane down what I think I'll need for 2x4s, and trying to think of how I'm going to put these together, because I need to do 2 trellises, each one 16 feet long, and they're going to be somewhere around 6 feet high or off the ground. So I think I have enough 2x4s here, and we'll notch them out and overlap one against the other, put a couple of screws through to hold them together, and hopefully it'll be strong enough that it'll all work out when we're done. So that's today's project. This thing's extremely noisy. I've closed the garage door because there's some neighbors outside trying to enjoy the nice weather. So to give them a little bit more peace and quiet, I've closed the door. I've got my earplugs out so I can use this thing in here because it echoes pretty bad. So we'll plane a bunch of wood down, and then we'll come back and start notching it out and see how things work out. Okay, so we've planed all of the wood down, all the 2x4s that we think we'll need. I've got the planer put away, I got the table saw out. I set up my rope fence with a scrap piece of wood clamped to the side. And what I've got it set up for, so when this wood passes by the end of my scrap and starts contacting the blade, this piece will not bind in between the fence and the blade, because now it has that inch of space, or 3/4 inches of space. And this is 5 inches from the end of the piece of wood to the blade, and the blade is set to cut halfway through the depth of this wood. So we'll do that on the ends of them, and then turn them so that they overlap each other, put a couple of screws through them to hold them together, and that's how we're going to make our 16-foot long beams for the top rails, and we'll do some more that way for the uprights for the legs too. So we'll do a bunch of sawing, take those pieces out and start assembling that and see how our dimensions work out. I'll cut them all that way first, just that one cut, and then we'll set the fence up so that we can turn the wood lengthways and finish cutting that corner out of that pieces of wood. I'll show you one here. So we had that set up with that scrap piece of wood, and we ran them through and we cut half of this depth out of our piece of wood. Then we got rid of that, and we had the fence set up so we could run along to come up to that first saw cut. And I put a piece of tape on my fence so I could stop the piece of wood there. Then the curve of the blade wouldn't be cutting beyond where we wanted it to. So I ran it through one side, and then we flipped it around and we ran it through the other side. And what was left, there's just a little piece of wood left. You can see maybe there. After you run the saw blade through from each side, you end up with just this little piece holding that block of wood in. So you can snap the block of wood out, then I just take a chisel and just shave that off. I don't know if I'm lined up there with the camera or not. I hope I am. And then we have a nice smooth area that we're going to make a joint with the other board overlapping. We'll put a couple of screws through to hold them, and that's going to make our long beams that we need for the top. And we'll do some upright ones and make the legs the same way. So we'll finish doing our cuts and start assembling. Okay, so we finished doing our trellises for the tomatoes out in the garden, and we've already installed them. I cut the bottoms and made everything the height that I thought I would drive them in the ground 20 inches deep, so to give them good support in the wind and stuff. Our ground is heavy clay, and driving them in the ground 20 inches was much tougher than I thought it would be, even with a sledgehammer. And the joints where I had cut them to overlap one against the other, they're not a tight fit anymore because I actually crushed the wood down quite a bit with a sledgehammer driving them in the ground. But they're just trellises for the garden, so it's not a big deal. So I'll take the camera out, we'll do a walk around there by the garden. You'll be able to see the garden. You'll see wood around the garden at the base. It's from the slats off of skids that I've cut before, just drove in the ground, just to keep the grass and the soil separate, so the dirt's not falling up the grass is not growing in the garden. Right now there is a lot of straw, grass clippings, sawdust laying on the tops of the beds for mulch, just to help keep some of the moisture in the ground when we water or when it rains, so the ground doesn't dry out so fast. So you'll see that also. So we'll take a walk around. That's our trellises that we built. We just put in a canary melon and some celery down here. We have strawberries over here, and the rest of that's all tomato plants on both sides of that wooden walkway. The wooden walkway is 2x4s left over from skids that we've just laid down. We have cucumber plants underneath this trellis in here growing. Carrots are not doing real good, but there's some coming up. Spinach. This lettuce was a new lettuce that we tried. I can't remember the name of it now, but nobody really likes it in the house. It's a very peppery taste to it. I looked it up online and they said it was a cross between arugula and mustard plant. So it's very peppery and nobody really cares for it. We've got some garlic coming up next to the composter there. This bed over here, we got peas coming up, another type of lettuce, the broccoli rabe, and then from here to the end is all onions. So these smaller ones that look thinner here was a newer batch that we had put in, and the other ones down there have been in about 3 weeks longer. There's pepper plants on the end of that one, and the rest of that is got potato plants in it. They're just starting to come up underneath that mulch that we put on there. And there's no wood around that one yet. We expanded and made that bed at the last minute this year when we realized we didn't have enough room. So I haven't got wood yet to put around that one to keep everything separated. But that's what we've got for gardens. And you can see the yard. There's a barbecue way back there. Sunroom that we built 2 or 3 years ago. And the shed down there. So by the time we mow all this grass, that gives us enough grass clippings that as these ones dry out and start rotting down on all of this stuff, we can keep replenishing them. So that's what we have for garden. Those trellises that we had made for the tomato plants, but we pulled them out of the ground. They're just leaning up against the fence back there. The 2x4s on those skids are 40 inches long, and we cut them in half and put a bit of a point on them to help drive them in the ground. So the actual part of the leg that goes in the ground was only 20 inches long. Not quite long enough. Once we have strings hanging from those, and as the tomato plants grow, we just wrap the string around the stem of the plant and let it grow up the string.
and the weight of the plants and the softness of the ground when it started raining, they started to get a little tipsy in the summertime. So we're going to make new legs, a little bit longer, a little bit of a sharper point, because those were still quite difficult to drive in this clay soil. So we'll fix that up this year too when the time comes, and we'll put those back into the ground. Now this is the yard in the winter. Thank you for watching.